Om Jnanatimirandhasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshurunmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha.
This Mangala Acharan, maybe it's just another of those new fashions in ISKCON, but it's usually the speaker before a lecture. You'll see not only in ISKCON, but they recite it themselves. It's not like a group recitation. So, just for your information. So I wanted to call this meeting, actually I wanted principally for, I said disciples meeting, when I was principally thinking about those who are taking a lead in preaching, and that might include others like Satyanarayana Prabhu also, who's, although not my disciple in the official sense, but we're connected by service. When I say my disciples, that means the personalities who have been sent to me by Srila Prabhupada to engage me in some service here. So I wanted to discuss, there are many points about preaching and perspectives on preaching, practical points on preaching, and I was especially thinking of those devotees, to meet with those devotees who are taking the leading role in preaching Krishna consciousness. We have a bit of a mixed group here, and some of the points I may not want to go into so deeply with a mixed group. Maybe I'll meet with some of you, some of the others, just a smaller group later. I was hoping that some others might come also, but we didn't, so I'll have to maybe just change the tenor a little bit of what I'm talking about here. So this is more, this meeting I want to have this afternoon and tomorrow. And the idea is that I'll speak, and I wonder if any points are to be raised here. For discussion, we can take notes and we can discuss. So you'll need to have pen and paper if you're going to raise points for discussion. So this is more or less the topic is Srila Prabhupada's mission and our role within that. Prabhupada's mission is a very broad mission, which is meant for bringing every jiva in the universe to Krishna consciousness, and we can attempt to play some role in that. And although in one sense Prabhupada's mission is one, on the other hand different leaders within Prabhupada's mission, they tend to gravitate towards certain roles within Prabhupada's mission which may be somewhat different, and we see that even among the disciples of Srila Prabhupada who are on Prabhupada's order, initiating others into Krishna consciousness, they also have different perspectives and different outlooks and taking different services. Although the basic perspective is the same, to serve Srila Prabhupada, but there's personal traits also, and to at least some extent, the disciples of the different gurus tend to pick up the vision or the mission of their gurus in fulfilling Prabhupada's mission. So I want to discuss here about what our role is in fulfilling Prabhupada's mission and what my vision is, and we can discuss more. So I thought I'd start off with telling you what I'm doing and what I plan to do. I think most of you know that. I mean, it's quite plain to see what I'm doing. And more or less, I'm traveling mostly in India and also overseas. And I'm writing. And what do I plan to do? More or less the same thing. To continue with that. Writing is taking up a lot of my time. It is important, no doubt. Because the books, once they're written, they're there and they last, although this body won't. On the other hand, I'm seeing also that when I'm traveling and going to different places and meeting people, that's also very effective, it's very important also. So I'm torn between the two things. I can't neglect either of them. But the writing does take up a lot of time, especially this book on Srila Bhakti Saraswati Thakur. I could never have imagined that it would have been such a big project, and I thought that just now on my visit to Puri, I spent 2 months there, which was more time than I've spent in one place since I can't remember. Probably it was early 1980s when I was in Bangkok. I spent maximum 3 months at a time because we couldn't stay more than 90 days in the country anyway. So, and that must have been the longest I ever spent since the early 1980s anywhere. And I was writing while doing my work. Writing and gathering more materials for the book, morning till night. But still there's quite some way to go. And if I'm planning after Gaur Purnima to again go into a session like that. It depends. There's one devotee who's helping me with all this, who's very knowledgeable about these things, but I have to catch him and sit with him. For the first month when I was in Puri, he was sick, so I couldn't do anything. So hopefully I should gather all the material by Rath Yatra time, and then when I'm overseas I can get some time and add it all in. So maybe the writing of this book will be finished by the end of this year, because after Gaur Purnima there's no chance to do any work, and then after Rath Yatra until October there's no hope for any more research, and then I'll come back to India again by October. So like this it's going on. And then the other major book project I have is the Vaishnava Culture, Etiquette and Behavior book, which is also very important. I think if I sat down without any other disturbance, then maybe, Hare Krishna, maybe within maybe 3 to 4 straight months of writing, I could get the manuscript finished, after which it has to be edited, laid out, and then it will need indexing also, so it'll be some time. But I'm just talking about the time that I'm spending on these projects, and I have other writing projects, but I'm thinking after these 2 books are over, then I have other pending writing projects also, but they're not so important. I can do it sometime in my spare time. But and I have other important writing projects to do, but I'm hoping that I can get some good assistant who's good in writing in English and organization, and who I can give the work to, discuss it with them, and just with some guidance they can organize the books for me. Because the other books I've got hundreds of pages of material and it needs organizing, which is a big job, which would take again some years to do probably, if the way I'm going on. But maybe if someone can help with that, then I'd be more free, to have more time for also this traveling place to place and preaching. And there are other things I want to do, which I'll speak about later. Apart from traveling and preaching, I also want to do more sitting in one place and seeing about educational projects, varnashram projects, living on the land. One thing's for sure, by Prabhupada's grace there's no shortage of service for any of us. There's so So much work to do. So this is more or less what I'm doing, and one thing you might be thinking is that maybe all of you are seeing less of me than you used to. Well, there are two reasons for that. This year I put a lot of time into writing, trying to get this book finished. And another thing is that it's only too easy for a traveling sannyasi to increase his commitments, because there are many invitations to go to many places. And it's nice when people call you to say yes instead of no, which I usually say. And then when you say yes, and then it's very nice preaching, and then people expect you to come back again, and it goes on like this. I'm trying not to. On one hand, it's needed that our ISKCON sannyasis travel to the different places and give some association to different devotees in different places. But on the other hand, the more places they travel to, the less quality input they can put. If you don't spend much time in any place, then you don't get to know people so well, and it just becomes a kind of in and out kind of job. And also the sannyasis themselves, to be able to give quality input, they also need time themselves for quality hearing, chanting, study, and all these things. So what's the solution to this? Well, there's no easy solution, because ISKCON is growing faster than the ratio of members of ISKCON growing, and the number of centers, including preaching centers everywhere, is increasing at a far greater proportion than the number of sannyasis. And we want to make more sannyasis, but it's not just a matter of rubber stamping people. They have to be up to some level. Plus, in ISKCON, for the last maybe 10 years or 15 years, are very conservative in awarding sannyas, which is good in one sense, because it's if it's difficult to take sannyas, then it means that if the level is high, then we can hope that the quality of the sannyasi will be as expected. But if we make it very easy to take sannyas, then it may not be so good. But then the other side is that maybe some good men who could take sannyas are not getting the opportunity, and the movement as a whole is suffering for lack of association. Well, one way, one natural response to this is that, of course, it's not just the stick that makes a person a sannyasi. Holding a stick is relatively easy, but actually being able to give others meaningful association, that has got nothing to do with one's varna or ashram. So we can see that practically many devotees, by their qualities, they are fulfilling the roles of spiritual leaders to others, even without any high official status. And names that spring to mind in India are just like Radhe Shankar. Of course, he has a title, Temple President of ISKCON Pune, but his preaching and giving association and guidance to others far exceeds that of most Temple Presidents, and that's also true of Devamrit Prabhu in Belgaum. And those are two prominent examples, and many others also. Many of you also are looked up to by others. That's a natural result of preaching. So anyway, this is what I'm doing, and I apologize that I'm not more available, but I'm trying to make myself available in the form of these, like I say, in the form of these books also, which I strongly feel are going to be important books for helping to give guidance to devotees in our society and helping to orientate, give direction to our devotees in various ways. So like this we have this festival here in Baroda, and here in Baroda I'll be coming, I will continue to come. I was spending much more time actually in Baroda when I was staying at that farmhouse, but now I don't have access to that, so that's one reason. Now, other way, so I'm coming here, and at least, Hare Krishna, I'll be coming to, every year since I met about temple I opened, I've been going to that festival there. They have lectures for about 5 days, and then the Rasa Yatra there, although not many devotees from this side go there because they're all busy in their Ramnavami festivals in their respective temples, but at least I'll be coming to Gujarat at that time. Then at Ratha Yatra time, like that. Then after, maybe just before going to the west, just after coming back to the west, so I should be in and out of Gujarat still about 5 times a year, whatever happens. And other places. Main places I'm based in or visiting are Gujarat and South India. Now, for keeping in contact or for facilitating hearing from me, which is also important for disciples, there are 2 things. One is this BBKS Sangha on email, in which I'm almost daily sending out a quote from Prabhupada or answering different questions which are posted there. And although it's mostly quotes from Prabhupada, at the same time it's selected quotes which give some idea of the particular mood of Srila Prabhupada, which I'm trying personally to imbibe and to inculcate also. So who's regularly seeing that BBKS Sangha? You're not seeing Keshavanand? No, I didn't see him. That's in Vidyanagar, that's being circulated. Like I said, it's mostly quotes from Prabhupada and maybe from other acharyas, but they're selected quotes, and they set a particular kind of mood. I think maybe the congregational devotees, I received from them letters of appreciation for this. That it's one way, especially those who are not living near to temples, they find that very valuable form of getting some regular powerful drops of instruction. Prabhupada gave the example that cyanide, it's one small drop of cyanide solution can affect the whole body. So in the same way, it's small doses of spiritual subject matter can have a very powerful effect. Prabhupada gave that example. Cyanide injection example. Just like a very small dose, it is very powerful, it has a very strong effect. So in the same way, even a small dose of spiritual instruction can have a very powerful effect. So I'd like that my disciples could have access to and regularly read that BBK is sending, which means you have to be on email often, because mostly I'm sending almost maybe 250 to 300 days a year. I'm sending something. And it's amazing also to see the quotes from Prabhupada. It's like, they're good, they're very strong and potent quotes, and I just keep on coming across, during my reading, and coming across more and more. It's an unlimited stock. And there's also this, what was called the tape ministry, although it's more like a CD ministry now, in which my lectures are available. So you're supposed to have enough time to chant your rounds, attend the temple programs, do service, read Prabhupada's books, listen to Prabhupada's lectures, and listen to my lectures also. So anyway, somehow or other you have to fit it all in. But how many of you have got any of these CDs or lectures, or have the opportunity to listen to them? Quite a few. Any news? Is Madhav going to bring some CDs and lecture tapes?
He did some work, but the volume was very low. So he is doing it again, and maybe tomorrow he will bring with him something.
After all these months, it's maybe not. Months and a lot of money spent also. And you're not sure if he's got anything. He may or may not have something ready.
Means the CDs are ready, but he told that the volume was little less. But anyway, he will come with those. It was not like perfect. This up to the mark. Volume was little less. So he was trying to do it again. But the previous CDs are ready. There's some 6 sets he told you ready.
6 sets, but the sound is not very good. So you have to have a super blaster system to be able to hear them, is it? Maybe you could discuss with him. Also, you were doing some work on that? You managed to do some work before you came to India. Something should be done about this. I mean, spending a lot of money actually, and a lot of time is being invested, but it requires some little technical expertise. No doubt he's done a lot of work also, but if you don't know what you're doing, then despite all good intentions, and despite spending money and despite spending a lot of work, if you don't know what you're doing properly, then it's all photo, as they say. So it's more or less a waste of time. So anyway, we hope there will be something to show for it. Yeah, so I said, getting back again to that point, that my mission within Srila Prabhupada's mission, if you want to call it that, or my service is mostly, as you can see, I'm based in India. I'm also going to the West because I feel there are many things that I've learned of course, by hearing from Srila Prabhupada and by being in India, that can be offered to the devotees in the Western world also, and to people in general in the Western world, although I don't spend much time there. So I'm going there with the idea of, one thing is distributing my books there. Another thing is that from my going to the West, some devotees, young men, are coming to India and serving here, which is very good for the preaching here, seeing as Indians are so much enamored by the West. It doesn't seem to be getting any less as time goes on, it seems to be getting more. That their fascination with the West, it's not wearing off, it's just increasing and increasing and increasing. So it's always, the only good thing about that is that we can bring devotees from the West, and people in India are appreciating that. white elephants, dancing white elephants. Prabhupada used to say. Of course, you should do more than be dancing white elephants. But that's good for the devotees who come. They can learn something about Indian culture. If there's anything left, there are still a few signs here and there. And it also helps devotees coming from the West to get a broader vision of Krishna consciousness, especially because in the West, Krishna consciousness appears to be like some kind of minor religious cult. And devotees themselves may be affected by that outlook. And their faith in Krishna consciousness being actually the absolute truth is usually bolstered by their coming to India and seeing how well our movement is accepted and how well it is established here. So it's good for the devotees who are coming, and hopefully they can become more steady in Krishna consciousness. And at some point, some may more or less stay on in India, and some may at some point in time go back and hopefully share what they've learned in India. Or just like two devotees who are based in South India recently went back to their respective countries, and they've gone back as preaching. No, actually four. There were two who were doing Sankirtan here, and now they've gone back and they revived the book distribution in Serbia. And then one went back and he's not exactly opened a center, but he's become the leader at a center that was running on as a congregational center without any residential devotees. So he's become like more or less something like a temple president there. So he's become a preaching leader. And then one has revived the Sankirtan in Slovenia. So they've gone back. They've become strong actually from their time here and gone back as preaching leaders. So stay on, as long as those who are coming from the West stay on, and when you go back then we expect you to be able to contribute something substantial to the preaching mission in the West. I'd like to thank the devotees who are coming from the West also for coming, and I know it's difficult for you in many ways. Culture is different, the language is different. In the beginning you have to, it can be very disconcerting when you can't communicate with anyone. You don't know what people are saying, and you don't know what they expect of you. And then gradually you get to learn a little English, and that's not even the main language of the country. So I know it's difficult in many ways. The prasadam is different, and the people are different, and the weather is different, and so many things are different, and it can be very difficult. The health breaks down in different ways than you're used to in the West. People say, well, you get sick in India. Of course you get sick in the West, but you get Indian-style diseases which you're not used to. So I know it can be very difficult for you, but nevertheless, encourage you to stay on as long as you can. If you can dedicate your life to preaching here, that will be very good. As I've many times said to you, and I will repeatedly say to you, especially if you're going to stay on, you should learn an Indian language. Or if you're in South India, learn the local language. If you're in North India, learn Hindi. If you want to be in Gujarat, you would also learn Gujarati. It makes a very big difference in preaching. For a start, you can preach to much more of the population if you can speak the language which they understand. And another thing is that it's easier for you also. It helps you to interrelate with the people and relate with them better. I know sometimes the Western devotees, when they come, they have difficulty dealing with the Indian devotee, and it's some kind of cultural difference, because the culture is still being quite different in the West and India, although it's not as different as it used to be. But there are different ways of thinking, a different outlook. There's a term, culture, the terms like culture shock, cultural barriers. So these things are recognized even in communist society. But you'll probably find after you've spent some time in India that if and when you go back to the West, you'll actually prefer to be in India. Because you'll find it's actually the whole atmosphere, even now, is better for spiritual life than in the West. People are naturally more open to Krishna consciousness. And your status as a sadhu, which is zero, in whichever country you may be from, people don't give a damn about sadhus. At best, if they may tolerate you. Well, in some countries which are very pious, and there are not many of them, like Italy, they respect a person in monk's clothes. In Croatia, do they respect? Not Hare Krishna devotees. But in general, if they tolerate you in the West, that's good. Otherwise, they think they're just stupid. So it's like a negative thing. But here, you might have just come out of a factory in Russia or something, and then all of a sudden you come to India and you're a big sadhu, Maharaj, touching your feet and everything. So it's easier on the mind to be accepted by others than to be always something strange like you are. Of course there's something strange here also in Western sadhu, but it's respectedly strange rather than disrespectedly strange. So apart from that, you'll find that the whole culture is more favorable for spiritual life, and often though in the beginning you may think that, these Indians or whatever it may be, but after some time you'll probably find that, as I do, that on the basic cultural level I relate, or I feel more comfortable with Indian devotees or Western devotees who are acclimatized to living in India than I do with the Western devotees who are still very much influenced by their Western culture. So of course we're all spirit souls, but there are cultural differences also. And even Prabhupada's intimate disciples noticed that Prabhupada in India, they said he was like at home. He seemed more natural in his behavior. And that's one thing that you maybe learn in India also, that you not learn, you osmotically pick it up. That means it rubs off on you. You just naturally imbibe it, is that in India people tend to be more natural in their dealings with each other. Of course in Croatia also, in Russia maybe like that somewhat, although there are different kinds of Russians. Some are very demonic, but others are very friendly. But if you come from a country like England, where I'm from, or Sweden, then people tend to be very cold, but in India people they're more open in their dealings. So I often notice that when I go to the West, people are a little bit surprised at the way I behave with them, because they're used to sannyasis being a little aloof. But in India you can't be aloof because there are always people around you and you have to deal with them all the time. So, and these are things that you won't notice, but gradually as you become I'm talking to the Western devotees here. We're all spirit soul, but there are bodily and cultural differences. So you'll find that gradually as you imbibe the local atmosphere, it's actually very favorable for your advancement in spiritual life, and even as a person, how you deal with others. You have to learn to deal with so many people, because although India has traditionally been known as a land of shortages, maybe not so much now, but one thing there's definitely no shortage of is people. So there are many people and we have to deal with many different types, and we have to learn tolerance because things don't work and so many ways. So this is good for your advancement, and please learn the language. the champion in this among my disciples is not here. That's Nityananda Das, as distinguished from Prabhu Nityananda Das, who's also come from South India now, who's only speaks Russian. Is it only Russian, or there's another language in Belarus? No, they only speak Russian. There's Ruski, there's no Belaruski language. No? Okay, they only speak Russian. So he's in the process of learning English, but Nityananda, who's from Latvia, who knew a little English before he came to India, and his mother tongue is Russian, and I think he's still not even 21 years old, huh? And he's been in India less than 2 years, and he's giving lectures in Tamil, which is maybe the most difficult language in India after Sanskrit. So he's the champion. And we also have and there are others in the field also. Gauranga, shortly behind Nityananda, is speaking some Hindi, and Gauranga's, or the servant of Gauranga's father, namely Jagannath Mishra Das, is also speaking some Hindi. So it's a good family of preachers. So it's a struggle, no doubt. And you can get by just by speaking English. And it is a bit of a struggle, but if you learn the language, it makes a lot of difference. So please, those who are in North India, you should learn. I know you're in the beginning, you have to learn English, sorry. But then you also have to learn some local language. Maybe if you're a little older, like Bhagwan Pandit, then maybe it doesn't matter so much. But if you're still a little young, how's your Hindi, Bhagwan? Not so good. That's alright. Anyway, you can also learn some. Alright, so we have many things to do in the world, in India. There's another thing, we're talking about keeping in touch, there's another thing which has been talked about a lot and is gradually taking shape. There's a website coming up, which, when is that expected to be operational? The pilot, what's it called? The pilot edition? 3rd January, it will be accessible. Okay. So you could just inform through BBAK saying, obviously you'll do that when something's there. Alright, I think all of you anyone who's seriously practicing Krishna consciousness and engaging in the preaching mission can understand that there is a lot of work to do. You're feeling that? There's a lot of work to do. So much work to do. So much scope for spreading Krishna consciousness. If we had more preachers and we were more organized, and we could, actually this movement could have a tremendous impact, and it's very much needed as the whole world is going more and more down and down into gross materialism, and the cheating religion is increasing more and more and more and more. So we have so much work to do. We could never think that what to do. Well, we may think what to do, but it's a matter of a choice of different things to do rather than wondering what to do. Maybe Mataji needs a chair. Someone can bring a chair for her. She can sit like that? Okay. So there's so much tremendous work to do, and everyone should take up some role in this preaching mission and dedicate themselves, whether brahmacharis or sannyasis or grihastas. Grihe thako, bane thako, sada hari balena, whatever ashram you may be. Apart from our own bhajan, we have to do something to push on the preaching mission. Do something means we should do a lot, or as much as we can. Actually, what can we do? We are only tiny living beings, but we should at least try our utmost, do something useful, do something in Krishna's service. Prabhupada's mission, Prabhupada has such a great mission. I'm seeing myself, now you're organizing this Vyasa Puja. Vyasa Puja means, actually it's how I shall worship Vyasa. Not how you shall worship me, but how I shall worship Vyasa. That's how I should see it. So that means another year, and none of us are growing younger, everyone's growing older. Time is going by. There's so much work to do. We have to try and do something in this lifetime to satisfy Krishna. And there's so much to do, and it seems like we're going slowly in doing what we need to do. Of course, it could be said that slow and sure. We don't want to be also try and do too many things all at once and then everything collapse. The base should be strong. But at the same time, there's no room for complacency. There's no room for thinking, well, we're doing enough and everything's okay. Rather, we should be thinking how to do more and more in Krishna's service. There are many things I want to do myself within Srila Prabhupada's mission. Within Prabhupada's mission, like I say, there are so many facets of Prabhupada's mission. But within Prabhupada's mission, there are many things that I would like to at least be involved in some way. And by Krishna's grace, by Prabhupada's grace, I have several competent and dedicated disciples. So, as you are helping me in my service and trying to serve within Srila Prabhupada's mission, I'd like to encourage you to continue to do so, and I'd like to talk here about some of the different facets of Prabhupada's mission that I'm thinking about more. For most of you this won't be anything new, but it's maybe restating and maybe more clearly defining what we are doing, and we can have more discussion on that also. Now, turn out Prabhupada's mission is that we're talking about serving in ISKCON, which is the manifest form of Srila Prabhupada's mission. Prabhupada had great desires to fulfill the desire of the previous acharyas by spreading Krishna consciousness all over the world, and he founded the International Society for Krishna Consciousness for that purpose. So, we're all serving within ISKCON, we're all servants of ISKCON, which Srila Prabhupada said is my body. And certainly ISKCON is a tremendous vehicle for spreading Krishna consciousness. There's no doubt about it. The potency of Prabhupada's books, the program that he gave us, just the simple program, chanting Hare Krishna, preaching, especially distributing Prabhupada's books, establishing these temples, all these different programs, they definitely have tremendous potency for spreading Krishna consciousness. That Sarva Jagate Nishta, what is that verse? It states that Nam Hoite Hoi Sarva Jagate Nishta, that the holy name of Krishna has the potency to deliver the whole universe. So ISKCON is a vehicle for a medium for preaching and practicing the chanting, or the pure chanting of the name of Krishna. The pure chanting of the name of Krishna is always accompanied by hearing about Krishna, serving Krishna in various ways. So when we say that the essence of Krishna consciousness, or the essence of ISKCON, is chanting Hare Krishna, that's true, but we should also know that chanting Hare Krishna is never separate from hearing about Krishna, serving Krishna. Without hearing about Krishna and serving Krishna in various ways, there is no pure chanting of the holy names. They must be accompanied by hearing about and serving Krishna in various other ways, such as deity worship, preaching, which is also non-different, it is also kirtan, serving the Vaishnavas, organizing festivals, and so many different ways of serving Krishna. So these are all non-different from chanting the holy names of Krishna. They're all inseparable from chanting the names of Krishna. And ISKCON is the prime medium for spreading the pure chanting of the holy names of Krishna all over the world. It is empowered by Srila Prabhupada's desire to serve his Guru Maharaj and his previous acharyas. So that is the force within ISKCON. We say purity is the force. That purity means the pure desire to serve the mission of the previous acharyas by spreading the chanting of the holy name. So definitely there's tremendous potency in this movement, and it continues to spread all over the world despite so many difficulties, which to a large extent, a lot of the problems of ISKCON nowadays, in the early days there were difficulties from so many external demoniac forces which were trying to stop this movement from starting. But now there are many, those governmental forces which used to, or societal forces which used to oppose the spreading of Krishna consciousness are now not very much opposed to it. But mostly, because Maya has her own ways of working, so mostly the difficulties in spreading Krishna consciousness or practicing Krishna consciousness is disturbing our movement is mostly coming from inside our movement nowadays. As our movement has spread widely, it seems an almost inevitable consequence that it seems to become difficult to adhere to very high standards in a mass scale, and whatever the reasons may be, we find if we are to be frank, if we're not to walk around with our eyes and ears closed, then we will see, for instance, in India we'll see that there's mixed with bhakti, there's often some materialism on the part of the persons who are the full-time members, or materialistic outlook on the part of those who are full-time members of the society. As I was saying in the Bhagavatam class, was that yesterday morning? I was saying in Hindi class, I was saying about Swarthabilashi. Was that yesterday morning, wasn't it? So I was saying that this big institution like this temple is required especially for introducing the public to Krishna consciousness. And to have such a big project like this, and it's just one example, it requires so many people to perform various functions, such as pujaris and so many different things, cooks and preachers and so many ways. So for the sevaks, there is an arrangement for food, shelter, clothing, and so many things. So these facilities are afforded so that people may practice bhakti, with the aim of them selflessly performing bhakti, and some facilities are provided. But what often happens is that people see facilities and therefore they do bhakti. In other words, instead of they're doing bhakti and therefore the facilities are provided for them to facilitate their bhakti. But rather they do some activities of bhakti, whatever is required. So their main aim and object is to get to have the facilities. So we see that it's quite prominent in our movement of ISKCON in India, that certain people come and they may not even want you to preach Krishna consciousness straightforward, because that affects their ability to hoax people and collect money from them and go on with the show of bhakti. So these are some of the things we're facing. Materialistic attitudes, mundane ideas, compromise, feminism, sahajirism. These are some of the things that I wrote. This selfish, materialistic outlook, mundane ideas, that often we find that even though Prabhupada repeatedly said that modern education is just like a slaughterhouse, the modern education institutions are like a slaughterhouse, we find that many of our devotees, they find it, again maybe it's a consequence of spreading the movement very widely, but we have many householders and they feel it's their duty to educate their children so they can have what is called a good future, and otherwise how can they go on? And therefore our devotees are expected to encourage the children. Yes, you study nicely, but actually then we're just encouraging them to fill their head full of rubbish. That's actually what we're doing. So it might be a preaching ploy to say that, or just some kind of adjustment to the material world, to tell children that yes, you study nicely. But then if we ourselves start to think that actually, it's required that all devotees, they should, first of all you have to study, and these things are actually very important, because in Kami society people think this is very important. Everyone who is an actual human being has to have a university's degree, and actually master's degree minimum. And then they're the kind of people that are considered respectable. We were in one school and we asked the children, how old were they? About 11 years old. What is the purpose of this education? That we can get our degree and become respectable citizens. And then I lectured on this topic about how this is all nonsense. So people are very much caught up in this, and the thing is that if we start to preach in a kind of compromising manner, we may say that just because it's easy. If we tell, yes, you study and you chant Hare Krishna, it's easier for people to accept. Oh, okay, alright, I'll study and I'll chant Hare Krishna. But then, by repeating the same thing over and over again, we start to believe it ourselves. That's what happens. I've seen that, just like we started this Food for Life was started. This was never started in Prabhupada's time. Prabhupada said to do prasad distribution. But he did say we should feed everyone with Krishna prasad within a 10-kilometer radius of our temples. But he specifically said he didn't want like this disaster relief. You'll find in the Science of Self-Realization that someone was asking him, your ISKCON can help with our disaster relief. And Prabhupada wrote a letter bluntly refusing to engage. He said, this is because of your sinful activities. Rather, you should give all the endeavors you've made for collecting for your disaster relief. You should help us to spread Krishna consciousness, because the whole material world is a disaster. This is the only real way to stop disaster. So Prabhupada is very clear on that. And then we have Food for Life. And I've actually seen that devotees who are doing this, they actually believe it, that this is, and then because they're always saying like this, you see, we're helping the Bridge Basis by, now they have ISKCON Vrindavan, Food for Life. We're helping the Bridge Basis by giving them all education. If they didn't have modern education, they'd remember Krishna more. But instead they're having modern education and they're going to get careers and become computer operators and go to the West and so many things. And the girls also, of course, have to get education, which typically in Brajabhumi or all of India, their education was they stayed at home. They make chapatis like this in Vrindavan. When they make chapatis, they cook them, they chant Hare Krishna. But now they all have to become PhDs and like this. So then ISKCON, Food for Life, Vrindavan is helping them. And they actually believe that. So, yeah, I was saying that what is our perspectives within Prabhupada's mission, because there are different perspectives. And in our movement, I am what is called a conservative. I was told that about just 3 months ago by the chairman of the GBC this year, that you are considered within our movement a conservative. So yes, I'd like to conserve what Prabhupada gave us. Of course there is room for innovation, but not at the expense of compromise or changing what Prabhupada gave us. And conservative, yeah, because Prabhupada was very liberal, but we have a tendency to take what Prabhupada gave as allowances, or he would allow something sometimes, and then we take that as the standard. And then we liberalize it even more, or we compromise it even more. So, like this, the mundane ideas. We can discuss this also, because I'm just stating what would be called a hard-line outlook. But then in our, what we could call our practical preaching field, then we say, how do we advise people? Just like these children in the school, they asked me, what actually should I do? And I told them, well, even if I tell you what actually you should do, you won't be able to follow it, because you'll come under, I'll be here today and I'm going tomorrow. But in your practical life, you'll find, if you do what I tell you to do, you'll come under tremendous pressure from your teachers and from your parents not to do what I tell you to do. So you won't be able to do it. So anyway, you go on with your education and chant Hare Krishna and read Prabhupada's books and understand that this education is not the ultimate. It doesn't help us attain the ultimate goal of life. So, actually how to preach pure Krishna consciousness in a world which is a long way from Krishna consciousness, and in an ISKCON society which is also, in many ways it's not the society that it was when Prabhupada was here, which is understandable in many ways because it has grown and its composition is not the same. There's mostly Westerners who are not married, so maybe it won't be as idealistic. But someone was telling me the other day that they were speaking to a GBC member, and they were talking about how we have to preach about how everyone has to surrender to Krishna, take up pure devotional service. And apparently, I was told that the GBC member said, "No, we don't preach like that nowadays. That we just try to introduce people to chanting Hare Krishna, let them come along at their own pace." So definitely there are different outlooks. I mean, it's within our society we're finding that all the time. Just like when this Kamalakant, he came from Salem to Gujarat to join the temple, and there was some minor disturbance among his family and friends, and some small thing came in the newspaper in Salem about how the ISKCON devotees had misled him or something like that. It was a tiny thing in the newspaper on one day in the local newspaper, but then a temple president of another center in Tamil Nadu complained that our devotees there are ruining the preaching by making bad publicity. I said, well, we convince someone to take up Krishna consciousness seriously. And at least since the time of Daksha, it hasn't been popular. It wasn't popular at the time of Daksha, it wasn't popular at the time of Hiranyakashipu, and it never will be popular. So you say, well, nowadays we don't preach to make full-time devotees. Oh, really? We don't want to make Brahmachari devotees? So there are different outlooks. They compromise in various ways. Feminism, because in Karmi society, because they've encouraged contraception, so women don't have to have children. You have as much sex as possible and as few children as possible. So then the women, they're no longer bound to their homes, they're liberated. And therefore they can also become astronauts and so many other things, which formerly they couldn't be. So the influence, this very strong social influence has also entered our movement, and although Prabhupada never made any devotees in women's bodies, he ascribed to them different roles. He never made any GBCs or temple presidents, but that's now coming, and although it hasn't entered ISKCON India yet, the devotees in America who are very much enamored by American culture and don't like India or Indian culture or Vedic culture. Of course that's a very broad generalization, but not an inaccurate one. They want to push this in India also. So this contradicts the role given throughout history in Vedic culture and throughout Shastra, what is nowadays called sexist, discriminating against women. But actually it's not discriminating against women, it's assigning different roles for maintaining peace in society so that people can become Krishna conscious. And it's not just something that Prabhupada taught, but it's in every, it's in Vaishnavism, in Shaivism, among Smartas, among Buddhists even, who are not even in Vedic culture, that it's always there, that there are different roles. So this is very prominently being promoted within our ISKCON today, and certainly the more it's promoted, it will cause disturbance by agitating the ghee and fire principle. If you put a pot of ghee next to fire, it will melt. This is the example given in the Bhagavatam. So that is there. Another thing is that Prabhupada very much wanted to establish Varnashram Dharma. He wanted our ISKCON society to introduce that. in which there are different roles for different genders, for different varnas and for different ashrams. But modern society, being influenced by Mayavad, just wants everyone should be the same. Everyone dresses the same, everyone looks the same, men are the same as women, and there's no distinction between a factory worker and a learned scholar of Shastra. Everyone is all the same. This is Mayavad. So that's a prominent symptom of modern Western culture, which is also being promoted in Karmi society, also in India. So this is another thing. I thought I might let you know, if you didn't know, that these are some of the things I'm against within our society, which I strongly feel that there are certain currents in our society at the present time which I don't agree with. It's not what Prabhupada taught us or that Prabhupada wanted us to do. So I'd like you to be aware of that. There's also more difficult to define, but definitely there is a kind of sahajaism. That we find that our previous Acharya, Prabhupada, Bhakti Saraswati Thakur, they were very reticent. Reticent means careful about discussions of Radha, Krishna, intimate Leela, and all these things. Even chanting the name of Radha, no, they wouldn't do that. Except maybe some Jai Radha, Madhava like this. But we won't find where they chanted Jai Radha. Never. Very, very reserved in this matter. Seeing that so much damage has been done in Vaishnava society by open propagation of these topics among persons who don't have the qualifications for it. But in modern Vaishnava, or modern ISKCON, let's be more specific, there is increasing tendency to speak on the intimate pastimes of Radha and Krishna, which I certainly feel that's deviation from how Prabhupada taught us and how he wanted us to continue teaching. Not that, as Prabhupada also stated, it's not that the topics of the gopis are banned, but very cautiously dealt with, not meant for public distribution or public talking, or even not among very neophyte or beginning devotees who like to hear these things, no doubt, because it's nice to hear about. But then the tendency is that we tend to think that, yes, this is for me, I'm ready for this, when we're not. It's not even following what Chaitanya Mahaprabhu himself did, because he only discussed these intimate pastimes with very few devotees, and even he would daily hear Bhagavatam recitation from Gadadhar Pandit, who is Radharani. And especially Gadadhar Pandit would recite the sections from Bhagavatam about Dhruva Maharaj and Prahlad Maharaj, with Chaitanya Mahaprabhu and all his followers. And at night, with Swarup Damodar and Ramananda Rai, then only Mahaprabhu would discuss these very intimate topics. And also, of course, Rupa Goswami, especially among the 6 Goswamis, Rupa Goswami and Raghunath Das Goswami wrote about these very high topics. And the other 6 Goswamis, they were Gopal Bhatta Goswami wrote on rules and regulations of Vaishnava life. That was his topic. Sanatana Goswami also, Hari Bhakti Vilas. Sanatana Goswami also, his major work apart from Hari Bhakti Vilas is that Brihad Bhagavatamrita, in which he describes the different levels of advancement of devotees. And Rupa Goswami also, he wrote about the intimate pastimes of Radha and Krishna, but then he also wrote the first part of Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, is just establishing the basis of bhakti. And so anyway, I see that Prabhupada himself, we only have to read this Transcendental Diary, this section where this Gopi Bhava Club began in Los Angeles, and how Prabhupada, he was very much against it. The devotees, they were reading from Chaitanya Charitamrita, they were concentrating on reading these sections which describe the intimate feelings of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. And they said to Prabhupada, we're only reading your books. And Prabhupada said, not all of my books are meant for you. Because they weren't reading Bhagavad Gita, they're just reading these very intimate, there are some sections of Chaitanya Charitamrita. And then they said that Prabhupada, we're just trying to develop a desire to understand these things. Prabhupada said, first deserve, then desire. So it's very clear what Prabhupada's outlook on this, but maybe being influenced by various Sahajiya gurus who are supposed to be in our broader family, that means disciplic descendants of Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, who concentrating on speaking these things and presenting themselves as very high, and then you should come to me and be my follower. But we see that Prabhupada, he didn't resort to such cheap tricks to attract people. He gave them what they needed. Anyway, I could also learn so many leelas and repeat them and advertise myself as a super guru. But this kind of fanaticism, it is not actually very helpful. And people, they develop an artificial approach to Krishna consciousness. Artificial means they'll only Radhe Radhe, they'll always be saying, but where is the purification of heart? Where is the understanding of Bhagavad Gita as it is? So, I see Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, even though he was so deeply philosophical, if you'll see his writings and his lectures, it's just like our own Srila Prabhupada, it's mostly Sambandha Gyan, understanding what is Krishna consciousness as it is, as distinguished from so many bogus ideas. You've just been reading, I gave you some books to read, isn't it? It's a lot of it is about what Krishna consciousness isn't, to distinguish reality distinguished from illusion for the benefit of all. And then Abhidaya, how to practice properly. And only sometimes, and very rarely in public, would he talk about what actually is the Prayojan Tattva. Although he also made it clear that that is our goal, to enter the pastimes of Radha and Krishna, but he was very reserved in discussing it very widely, more concerned with discussing what is Krishna consciousness on the level that we're at now, and the level we need to preach at, and the level that we need to practice at. So, those of you who are coming to me, although I maybe and am criticized for being a conservative, but at the same time I very strongly feel that it's my duty, if I'm to represent Srila Prabhupada, which is my only qualification to take this big seat anyway. What am I doing sitting here? Who am I in relationship to you? The only qualification is that I'm simply representing what Prabhupada gave us. And without that, then how can I even, claim to take the role of guru or spiritual leader or whatever? Because that is the only qualification. So I can't just say that, well, everything is okay and everything is wonderful and whatever anyone does, it's all wonderful and it's all great, because practically I see, and anyone who reads Prabhupada's books regularly, they can see as it's not unheard of that people come to our devotees in the temple and say, well, should we follow what's in your books or what you do? There should be no difference between the two, and it's shameful that there is. But there is, anyone who's a little bit prabuddha, a little bit of awakened intelligence, they can understand that our movement doesn't always represent properly what the spirit of Prabhupada's books. And we saw that happen with the Gauriya Math also, that they failed to maintain the spirit of their Guru Maharaj, and then they had some temples and it went on, but the potency wasn't there. And now they're gradually picking up also on the strength of Prabhupada's movement's preaching. So definitely ISKCON is a movement with tremendous potency, but we have to stick to what Prabhupada gave us. That doesn't necessarily mean following rote formulas. That doesn't mean that rote formula means following something blindly. But at the same time, we should know what is the spirit of Prabhupada. Certainly he was very liberal in many ways, but at the same time he did give us very clear guidelines to follow. And my feelings, although this may sound very radical, I think I've spoken about my feelings about this previously to all of you. If not, well, maybe it's a bit of a shock for you, maybe saying all these things, but within our society, I'm also preaching how we have to very much understand and stick to the spirit, and to a large extent the form that Prabhupada gave us. People say, well, the form, that's changeable, but I'm not so sure about that. I feel that the form that Prabhupada gave us is based on the spirit that he gave us. And it's not so much, not just, we can just take what Prabhupada gave us and alter it and adjust it as we like until it becomes unrecognizable from what Prabhupada actually gave us. So what to do about this? Well, we can preach strongly. We can say openly. It's not an easy thing to do. Definitely people won't like it. Within our movement, more than outside our movement, if we preach strongly, people will protest. If we speak the truth. Of course, even in speaking the truth, some tact is required. It's not that Prabhupada always, it wasn't that everyone he met, he told them, well, actually you're an animal. Not everyone. Generally he didn't attack people personally, but he spoke on principles. Although sometimes if he saw someone was very puffed up or demoniac, he might directly tell them, or almost directly. Just like one professor came to Prabhupada and Prabhupada asked, what are you teaching? He said, Hinduism. He said, what do you mean by Hinduism? The professor thought, I'll give a clever answer. He said, I don't know. Prabhupada said, oh, you don't know? And you are teaching it? You are teaching the subject, you don't know what it is? And then he turned to Swarup Damodar, who is now Bhakti Swarup Damodar Maharaj. He said, he is also a PhD. So what do you say? Swarup Damodar, someone who purports to teach a subject but doesn't know it. What do you call him? And Swarup Damodar said, a cheater problem. You see? He also says, you're a cheater. So he wasn't always so directly heavy, but in general his mood was one that to be very straightforward and clear, because once we stop being straightforward and clear, then everything starts to become unclear. If things are not clear, then it becomes unclear. And people in general like that, because they like to pretend to be religious and at the same time not surrender to Krishna. That's what religion is in the world. Religion which is not Krishna consciousness, as it is, as Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur commenting on the Bhagavatam, second verse said, Priti Vite joto katha dharma nama chale bhagavata kahi taha paripurna chale. Whatever is going on in the name of religion in the world is simply cheating. So it's easy to cheat people. I don't think it's even, people say it's good for our preaching, we can collect more funds and more followers. I don't think so, because there are plenty of other organizations out there who are much more expert at cheating others than we are. And they've had a lot more practice. So it's better that we just stick to our own thing, and those who are sincere will come, and then funds and everything will come. Whereas if we have to compete with the cheaters, like I say, it's more difficult. If we have the wrong philosophy to cheat people with, then we have to. If we have Rajneesh or something like that, then it's easier. When you have Prabhupada's books and you're trying to cheat people, it becomes more difficult. Then you have to try and not have them read the books, and well, it doesn't really mean that. And so better stick to our own principles. Don't compromise. How to do that may require some tact. Definitely you're going to get in a few fights here and there, there's no doubt about it. And people say, well, you're just simply unruly, but if you want to live a peaceful life, then don't preach. That's all. If we actually want to preach, then be prepared for constant confrontation. Of course, preaching in India, there are many pious people, and it's not that we have to deliberately upset them. So we don't have to deliberately look for fights. They'll come anyway. Without our look, if we're actually trying to spread Krishna consciousness, then so many people will come to oppose. We don't have to go looking for fights, but then when people do, we should speak the truth straightforwardly. Then there will be, as Prabhupada said, if we're actually preaching Krishna consciousness, then there will be some opposition. So Prabhupada actually said that's a good sign. He said that shows that we're actually preaching what Krishna consciousness is. At the same time, we have to be careful while we're preaching Krishna consciousness. If we're preaching strongly, we have to always remember what is our own position, and not. There may be a tendency to become somewhat puffed up and think that I'm a great preacher, and often we'll be accused of that also. Who are you to say these things? So, in the words of Lord Jesus Christ, we should hate the sin and not hate the sinner. We may say, well, people are living like animals, but at the same time, we have to consider, well, I'm worse than an animal, and because I'm the most fallen, then Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's mercy has fallen on me. So we have to maintain this mood and not think I'm better. We should definitely practice Krishna consciousness very strictly, but at the same time we shouldn't develop a kind of superiority complex, which there may be a tendency like that. On the one hand, we have to discriminate. That question just came up this morning. I'm just going to stretch my legs again. A little stiff maybe because of the cold. There may be in dealing with devotees, we're enjoined to discriminate between those who are not very serious, those who are very serious, and those who are actually situated on the topmost platform. That's stated by Rupa Goswami. This verse. So on the one hand, we have to discriminate between different levels of devotees, because we have to choose our association so that it will be useful for our advancement. But on the other hand, we don't want to develop some kind of if we start to think, yes, I'm better, we're better, then that again becomes an impediment in bhakti. So we have to be strict in our practices, strong, and at the same time humble. Cultivate humility, which may seem to be somewhat contradictory or difficult, but we are enjoined to do so. And we can do that by thinking that I have to practice strictly because if I don't, I'm finished, I'm lost. I'm very foreign. We should always cultivate this mood. So, as Prabhupada himself was saying about preaching, Prabhupada was undoubtedly a very strong preacher of Krishna consciousness, but he always emphasized that the best preaching is distributing his books. Not that he didn't want other forms of preaching also, but definitely Prabhupada emphasized very much his book distribution. One time in Bombay, I think it was the last Pandal program, Prabhupada was speaking so strongly, you can get those lectures. Very, very strongly. And many people got up and left, they couldn't take it. Even with the amazing attraction of the Western devotees, which at that time was really something very special, but Prabhupada only lectured for about 20 minutes because he was very weak, but it was so heavy. He would speak slowly, but it was very, very strong. Telling people, why are you giving up your culture to take up, why are you taking up this dog culture of the West? And that was in 1977. And we look back, now we think that was heaven compared to now. But the process of westernization was going on, but it's really picked up a lot since then. So Prabhupada was saying that many people couldn't tolerate it, left. And then, I don't know if that's still there, but Tamal Krishnaraj used to send out these, every month he used to come to the temples, the BBT newsletter, he used to send reports on what Prabhupada was doing. I remember reading in there, there's many things I remember which I don't know if they're published now, anyway. But he recorded that Prabhupada said at that time, that's not in TKG's diary, because that's only in Vrindavan, but this was in Bombay before that. So, Prabhupada said that, Prabhupada noted how people leaving. Prabhupada said that therefore book distribution is better preaching. Because people don't get offended so easily. Sometimes people get offended by the books also. But it's a relatively passive medium. Not that bad. I mean, Prabhupada's books are alive, but you can always put it on the side. You can put it away. Anyway, for so many reasons, Prabhupada emphasized very much this book distribution, distribution of his books, especially. There are many other books in the Christian conscious movement at the present time, which they weren't there when Prabhupada was personally present. The only books available, sometimes we got copies of Brahma Samhita which would come in from India, Goya Mat editions. Prabhupada said we could read it. He didn't want us to, at least at that time, to read other books of his Guru Maharaj. And then the scientific basis of Krishna consciousness, Hare Krishna cookbook. There's not much philosophy in that. And then just shortly before Prabhupada left, maybe late 76 or something, this readings in Vedic literature came out, but mostly there was only Prabhupada's books. So devotees mostly read Prabhupada's books, but now there are many other books, and devotees are reading many other books. And often we find that devotees, they're not reading Prabhupada's books that much. And even reading seems to have gone out of fashion somewhat. They're not reading any books. But Prabhupada very much emphasized that his disciples, they should read his books. So you all have to do that. To read Prabhupada's books again and again. especially Gita, Srimad Bhagavatam, Nectar of Devotion, and teachings of Lord Chaitanya, and then later Chaitanya Charitamrita. There's a lot. We have to spend time. It takes time. We have to read Prabhupada's books. There are many things to do, but we have to take time out for reading Prabhupada's books. That is required. And other books may be read also. There are many useful books. Some books which are being published or circulated in the ISKCON world, I don't recommend. I don't want you to read. Those are my disciples. That most of them are at least okay, and some of them are very good. Some are not good. But definitely the basis of it is and must remain Prabhupada's books. So you all have to read them regularly and again and again. Prabhupada is inculcating a particular, not only is he inculcating the saints of Krishna consciousness, but with a particular mood which we as Prabhupada Anugas have to imbibe. As my disciples, you should also read my books. I'm also trying to inculcate a certain mood which is I see as not different from Prabhupada's mood. But that may help to focus our devotees on what that mode of Prabhupada is, because like I say, there are many other influences. There are all kinds of different influences on our movement, gross materialism and different kinds of sahajiyas and this and that. So reading Prabhupada's books very much helps us to keep us focused on the mood that Prabhupada wanted us to imbibe. And I would hope that reading my books also does that. So reading Prabhupada's books, distributing Prabhupada's books, this will definitely bring us the mercy of Prabhupada. There is tremendous scope for distributing Prabhupada's books, and we should do so. More and more, some of you are full-time engaged in book distribution, especially the Western, the devotees who come from the West. Mostly they are full-time. Mostly that's their service, doing the full-time book distribution. So others can and should also do in various ways, just like you're doing your mail-outs from Vallabh Vidyanagar for fundraising, but you also have to do consciousness raising by you raise the funds from their pockets and at the same time raise their consciousness from it's probably about the level of their pockets also, means in their genital. So raising the consciousness up to Krishna consciousness, you give them Prabhupada's books. That's one way. Another way, that's one thing I just saying to you in Hyderabad the other day, that it may not be possible for you to go on your whole life, either mentally or physically. It may be difficult to go out every day distributing books for year after year after year. But one way you can distribute many books, especially as Westerners, for Indians also, but if the Western devotees speak an Indian language and travel from place to place and give lectures, then just by doing that you can distribute so many Prabhupada's books. You'll sell more books actually, because so many people come and then they'll get inspired, and then you make a presentation and they buy something. So I will emphasize in the distribution of Prabhupada's books, but at the same time all these other programs have to go on, and they're all interrelated. Just like we require temples, we require devotees, preachers, so that they can personally introduce people to the principles which are in Prabhupada's books, and introduce them to reading Prabhupada's books, making devotees, bringing people into Krishna consciousness. If we can bring someone to Krishna consciousness, it takes a little effort, but if we get them inspired, then they'll go and distribute books also. So in this way the family of preachers increases. these temples are obviously they're very good facilities for preaching Krishna consciousness. And there's a lot of scope in the temples themselves, which in many temples is very much underutilized. So many people come to the temples, and then we should meet them, speak to them, encourage them to come to the class, encourage them to start taking up Krishna consciousness in their lives. In Vidyanagar they have that program of going to people's homes, having a small house program. I was speaking with Narayan and Gopinath last time about that, how they're doing that, but it needs to be more focused on what, and it seems to me they're just going and coming. But they should make a permanent connection, get people to start chanting, reading Prabhupada's books, taking up Krishna consciousness seriously. It didn't seem they'd even thought about it. It's just they go and they make friends and then they collect some money from them, some small amount, making a good impression. But we should make more than a good impression. The word impression in Sanskrit is samskar. But in English, impression it means just some. There's a different. How would you say in Sanskrit? It's more like an impression. That means something like an outlook or something like that. But impression, the real meaning is something that's very deeply. It's there and it stays. So making a good impression, actually the English word would be more correct, is a good image. But impression means something that stays. So people are coming to the temples, and of course many people they're just coming just out of some, they don't have any deep meaning for doing so. But at that time they're more impressionable. So you can meet people, talk to them, and try to encourage them to start at least listen to one class. For that reason we have to have classes going on morning and evening. Here in Baroda, for how many years now Bhagavad Gita class has been going on non-stop? Every evening? 98. So this will be the 6th year. So like this, and then so many other things are required. That when people come into devotional service, a lot of work is required to bring them up, and then to convince them what Krishna consciousness is, how demigod worship and bogus sadhu worship and all these things. What is pure devotional service? A lot of education, there's a lot of personal interest, so that requires organizing how devotees, they take up different roles. First of all, preaching to people, bringing them in, teaching. For that reason we ourselves have to know what is the philosophy of Krishna consciousness. We have to ourselves maintain a proper standard of Krishna consciousness. Because if we ourselves don't behave properly as devotees, then everything, whatever we say, that will all be finished. If we don't behave properly as devotees. If people feel that we're cheating them, if people think that we're more interested in their money than in actually benefiting them, or if our devotees, some brahmacharis becomes overly interested in some female members of the congregation or whatever, then definitely people will notice that, and then our whole preaching will be badly damaged, if not spoiled. So ourselves, we have to know Prabhupada's books, follow what is in them, and we require systems to bring people, whereby everyone is engaged in bringing people into Krishna consciousness, helping to keep each other strong so that we don't succumb to Maya in various ways, and then helping to bring each other up. And so I hope you're making notes, because these are all different points. we have to discuss. Definitely there's a lot more scope for preaching here in this tent, as in others also. So that's talking about book distribution. Apart from everything else, it's important that devotees engage in distribution of Prabhupada's books. Just now we had the marathon, and each year apart from the temple devotees, many congregational devotees are also engaged in this book distribution marathon. Baroda is lagging behind a bit, behind Surat and Ahmedabad. Of course they have a lot of sponsorship there, but it could be done here also. So at least during that 1 month there's a lot of book distribution going on. But even throughout the year we should always be conscious of that. When there are good opportunities, there may be for instance some religious meeting or something, and then we have to take advantage of that. Even if it's got nothing to do with Vaishnavism, go there, distribute Prabhupada's books, or just on a regular basis, maybe among our friends, or just going out in our area, door to door. In this way, every drop counts. And for those of you who are helping new people to come up in Krishna consciousness, when they get a little bit mature, then if you can get them doing book distribution, they'll get a very good taste for Krishna consciousness. Apart from the benefit they'll do for others by distributing books, they themselves will find some great taste in preaching Krishna consciousness. They also need help in doing that, because often they're a little afraid when they first go out. So definitely we want to increase this book distribution more and more and more. Every home should be full of Prabhupada's books. Now there's one great possibility for distributing books which hasn't been capitalized on. Is distributing full sets of Prabhupada's books. Of course now we have conversations, lectures, all these other books, but the basic set is that of Prabhupada's in English or other languages, Bhagavad Gita, Nectar of Devotion, Srimad Bhagavatam. That's the Gita we're regularly pushing up, but especially the Bhagavatam set. That's the next step after reading Gita. Put a Bhagavatam set of people. So if you can add Chaitanya Charitamrita, that's also good. And other books, Nectar of Devotion definitely should go with that set. And other books like Signs of Self-Realization, and other books, Krishna book. So that's something which we haven't got into as much as we could. There is good scope. It's not that expensive. People are spending money like anything these days. So it's a different approach. It's not as easy as selling individual books, but that is something that needs to be developed, selling sets of books. There are so many education institutes coming up, and we should ask people to sponsor, just like people, you know, go to people that are already like members. Why don't you sponsor some books for schools? Sets of books. Prabhupada very much wanted these sets of books distributed. So that's something that you can all, that we all have to, we should all feel responsibility for all these projects. Of course, some of us have greater scope to engage in these programs. The devotees who are living as grihasthas at home, they are more limited in the scope of what we can do. Although Krishna can empower you in so many ways also. My books also, I'm also writing under the orders and inspiration from Prabhupada. And many devotees writing to me and telling me how these books have helped them in their Krishna consciousness. That beginner's guide, that's like a virtual Shiksha Guru for so many people. And so many people told me that by reading that Brahmachari book can help them to get a lot of strength in Krishna consciousness. And by reading my memories of Prabhupada, some people who are about to leave ISKCON, at least one case I know that by reading that they thought, no, I have to stay. And then these glimpses of traditional Indian life. Some devotees have based their life on that. They're seeing on that vision. Because Prabhupada talks about these things in his books, but it's expanding on a theme which Prabhupada regularly, actually in his conversations more than, definitely in his books, but in his conversations, he discussed in more detail how he wanted devotees to live a very simple life and chant Hare Krishna. So that book, Glimpses of Traditional Indian Life, is giving a picture of how that is possible and how that works, or how it did work up until a very recent time, and how we can live like that. And certain devotees in the West have gained inspiration from that book, and they're trying to live their life along those lines. So that's also this. I feel very strongly about my own books. Also, otherwise I wouldn't spend so much time working on them. It is a lot of work, but certainly I feel, and I'm getting feedback that it is a very positive contribution to Vaishnava society. So you may also help to try to distribute my books. Mostly they're being distributed among people who are already taken to Krishna consciousness. Most of my books are aimed at people who are already taken to Krishna consciousness. That Ramayana also is that can be for the public, the general public. That's kind of beginner's guide. Message to Youth of India is also that's particularly meant for a certain section of the public. People have become devotees also by reading my book. So if you can assist me in whatever way you can in distributing these books, that would also be appreciated. Also producing them. Some of you can help in producing. We don't have this lot of talk about Gujarati production, but not much to show for it. Work is done and then it's lost and so many things. So, if you can help with that also, whatever you can do. This is all part of the educational. It's all educational. These books, Prabhupada's books, my books, they're meant for education. We also need formal education within our movement. That's coming up more and more. Formal education programs. So all the wrong idea is that the tendency for them to circulate in our society can be counteracted by education. So it's required that to train our devotees in the philosophy of Krishna consciousness. We shouldn't presume that they just know it. I've asked Suhotra Maharaj, who is probably or maybe certainly in terms of knowledge of various world philosophical systems, he must be number one in ISKCON. Very much learned in all different kinds of philosophies and very much at the same, very widely read and at the same time very much fixed in Bhagavat philosophy or the philosophy of the Absolute Truth as described in the Srimad Bhagavatam. So I asked him to give some philosophy seminars, which won't be for beginners, for people who have studied Prabhupada's books. It means for those who are, especially for devotees who are preaching in a more intellectual way, to get some background knowledge of all the different philosophies of the world and how they are imperfect or incomplete. And I'm not exactly sure what he's going to be talking about. There are different topics we've discussed, but we didn't finalize. And also knowledge of our own, deeper knowledge of our own Sampradaya's philosophy, and maybe as it relates to other Vaishnava philosophies like that. So he's going to be giving a 2-week seminar from March the 11th in Salem. So all of you are invited. You can go. Presumably there'll be morning and evening sessions. Good knowledge of English will be required. I don't think that the Russian devotees will be. I don't think they'll be able to translate it for them. Maybe Gunadam, but his level of English is it's a little tough. So, unless you should be somewhat fluent in English, otherwise you're probably not going to catch it. And the topics also that are discussed, it will be a little complex. But anyway, I'm just in the course of talking about educational topics. I'm hoping that if this works out, we can have him come around some more and give some more of his deeply philosophical seminars, so we can have a very strong philosophical orientation. And we can invite other preachers also to give different seminars or just to come. But I was particularly asking him because he has a very philosophical outlook on Krishna consciousness and is very competent in philosophy. And personally, I like to emphasize his very philosophical approach there. We could say there are two basic approaches in Krishna consciousness, the philosophical and the affective. Affective means that which affects us. That means more like emotional. So, as Prabhupada said, religion without philosophy is either sentiment or fanaticism, and philosophy without religion is simply dry speculation. So it's not that Krishna consciousness is only philosophy, it's not dry. Krishna consciousness is rasamaya, it's full of juice, transcendental juice. Rasa. But at the same time, not rasa. Rasa means rasable. Rasa. Rasa means that which has, certainly there's rasa in it. But the same point, just like this Sahajiyalism, as Bhakti Saraswati Thakur pointed out, that Sahajiyas mistake their mundane sentiments for spiritual ecstasy. So if we emphasize the emotional side without having a very strong philosophical basis, then we'll probably end up with a shadow or an imitation of Krishna consciousness. That's why all our acharyas, they get a very strong philosophical basis before they attempted to teach, or before they attempted to impart a what we would call an emotional means the pure spiritual sentiment for Krishna. That's not emotional in the mundane. Certainly it's emotional, but it's not a transformation of mundane sentiments. So I'm emphasizing very much, let our basis be strong. There should be a strong philosophical basis. So we want to develop this more also. Like I say, apart from writing my books, or at least when I finish writing these books, and hopefully even before that, apart from traveling around where I want to spend time in one place and spend some time with devotees and help to impart this deep understanding of Krishna conscious philosophy, so they can be very well fixed in this philosophy and preach it everywhere, live by it and preach it. So we require institutions for that. Prabhupada said he wanted every center of ISKCON to have or to be a Varnashram college, which the main thing is teaching Brahmanas. So we have to develop that and let people come and be trained in the philosophy of Krishna. Not just that we bring people in and give them a broom, or if they're more competent, give them a briefcase, and that's it. And you're supposed to chant, put your hand in your bead bag and take your side and do something. Run on the institution. But rather we should give people the facility by which they can become Krishna conscious, which they can deeply appreciate the philosophy of Krishna consciousness, and on that basis impart that to others. Now another thing another part of Prabhupada's mission is so much essential that Prabhupada spoke about very much and made some moves towards, is farm projects. Live on the land, simply and chant Hare Krishna. I know you've heard me say this many times. There's not much to show for it, but at very least we should talk about it. And then we can start to move towards it. And talking, it has some effect, because at least some of the people I'm talking to about it are taking it up. And it only makes sense, because if we're living in modern life, if we're a brahmachari, we might just about survive. Because even most brahmacharis at some point they become victimized by the sensuous atmosphere around them and decide to be a grihastha brahmachari. And then the grihastha brahmacharis, hopefully they're grihastha brahmacharis. Mostly for them to practice Krishna consciousness is not very easy. Because modern life means you have to spend all your time practically just working to make money, to live. And you have to be in bad association. Modern life is the epitome of bifale sevinu kripana durajana chapala shukalaba lagiva. For most people that's what it means. It means uselessly working to serve some useless person for the sake of some useless temporary sense gratification. And our grihastha devotees, mostly they're caught up in it. And they hardly have time to practice Krishna consciousness properly. It's very difficult to practice Krishna consciousness properly in that atmosphere. So Prabhupada, he envisioned that we should have farm projects where people can live and not be victimized by water. So live simply and save time for hearing and chanting about Krishna. So, as I see it, if the Krishna conscious movement is to develop without being compromised, and if it's to develop very widely, then these farm projects, which Prabhupada very much emphasizes, are essential. Because otherwise we're preaching among society at large and people becoming devotees. But in most cases they're not able to follow the proper Krishna conscious program. They don't have time, and they're much influenced by the broader society in which they live. And therefore they fall victim to compromises and to sahajas. So many gurus are going around and say, well, yes, Krishna Bhakti, very nice, and you just take Diksha from me, and you don't have to follow anything very much, and I'll give you the highest thing. You know, people, it's great, you know, it's going to tell me, you have to follow 4 regular principles, you have to chant 60 rounds, I don't chant 60 rounds. You have to read all these books, and it's too much, all this philosophy, and, you know, and here's this other guru, he's teaching the same thing. Chaitanya Mahaprabhu Sampradaya says, you know, you just take Diksha from me, and I just talk about Radha Krishna Prem Bhav, and that's it. You got the highest thing, without any effort. Sahaj, easy. You become a Sahajya. So actually that's what will happen. Unless we can give people a very practical program by which they can take up Krishna consciousness very seriously, then for most people it would be very difficult for them to do so. And even if they are practicing Krishna consciousness seriously, still they spend most of their time before they shaving or creep on a durajan. They're working for some company or for some boss, and they're practically forced to do that. So this is Prabhupada's revolutionary idea. Non-violent, non-cooperation. We just don't have anything to do with your society as much as possible. We live by our own standards, by Krishna's standards. Krishna is the farmer acharya. It's another thing. Tamar Krishna said to Prabhupada, because he was talking so much about farms, and Prabhupada, he said to Prabhupada, you are the farmer acharya. And he said, no, Krishna is the farmer acharya. Krishna is accountant for him. There's a flute, that's for calling the cows, and Balaram is the plow, so that's Krishi Goraksha. Krishna is the Paramacha. Or it's not my idea, it's Krishna's idea. So, write it down, it's something we have to discuss. Prabhupada said people will join our farms in the millions. Like I was saying, many people join our temples not so much to take advantage of the facilities so they can do bhakti, but rather they do bhakti so they can take advantage of the facilities, which isn't a very good platform. But and then such people are not very much interested in hearing and chanting about Krishna, so they're the ones who are sent out to preach. Preacher in ISKCON in India is a synonym for someone who goes out and brings in money. It's called preaching, by hook or by crook. And they don't know much about Krishna consciousness, and they're not encouraged to do so. But and mostly they become crooks, as you see. Mostly. Because they don't have any philosophical basis, and then they get some donation without a receipt, and it's, well, I'm also a servant of Krishna, and Krishna likes his servants to be happy, so, one for Krishna, two for me. These things are going on. So, if we do provide facilities which are very basic, no high living, comfortable living, very basic, and at the same time have a strong spiritual program, then many people who are perplexed at how to fulfill their material needs, and at the same time have an inclination to bhakti. Many people may take this up. And with good association, Chatur Vidha Bhajante Manjana Sukhatina Artham Jignasu Artharti Gyanacha Bharata Ashava. We can't expect that everyone who takes to Krishna consciousness is going to be on a very pure platform. But if we provide them a facility for simple living and high thinking, then they can gradually come to the platform of high thinking and dedicated Krishna consciousness. So for this, there's no other way but farm projects. How to run on these temples, it's a big endeavor, and how many people anyway are going to be brahmacharis, and how ISKCON is not supposed to be a society for that supports grihastas from its income. That may be there, but it's not the function. Rather, the grihastas, they themselves, they should form the core of society and donate to the temple. So, although pujaris may be maintained and this and that, but actually the traditional system is that people give them donations, or there's some fixed. Well, there are different systems, but it's not that ISKCON can just make more and more temples, and then anyone who takes up interest in Krishna consciousness can join the temples as they're set up. It's just not practical. Although, if there are farm communities Prabhupada envisage, then Prabhupada, any number of people can come. They can be engaged. So, I think I'll finish there for now, and then we can have class. Just one or two devotees, I'll say one or two things for. And then tomorrow morning, I'll speak some more things. And then tomorrow afternoon we can have discussion on the topics. Obviously I'm just talking about a few things very briefly. And these are things that I'm always talking about anyway. But I'm just bringing them all together. And then we can discuss more about how we can practically implement all things. So there may be some questions like this. So we'll finish this session for now. I won't take any questions now. Like I said, there'll be discussion later. So one or two devotees, I have a few things to say to them. I'll call you now and say that to you. And others may go to the temple. Can someone tell them to, now they're doing the Radharani Ki Jai, Maharani Ki Jai thing. So someone can just go and tell them, I'm going to be giving class soon. Who's going to do that? Who's somebody? Yeah. No. Class here? Well, then you have to announce it upstairs also. Alright, that's a good idea. But then I'll go away and chant Gayatri and come back. Now it's 7 o'clock. Maybe it's 7:20. No, it's 7:05 according to this watch. Is this the right time?
Yes.
So 7:20 we'll say, and then like that. I usually get delayed also, one way or the other. So then we can start. And can kartals and mridanga can be brought? Who's going to see to that? You have here, okay. Tomorrow morning, it would be nice also if you could, instead of me having to say each time, among yourselves you could think of things like this. Bringing kartals and mridanga. It's like, every time, every little thing. No one thinks that these things. We're going to have a little program here, so obviously we're going to need kartals and mridanga. And it's never, no one ever thinks of it. So, maybe you should have a little discussion among yourselves. I was speaking to Sri Kant Prabhu about that the other day.
You've got to stop it.
No, I'm talking about in general, how I was in Hyderabad and we were having programs and no one thought about how I should go there. Things like that, So that naturally I was late for everything. Well, the third one I wasn't late because when I saw there was no arrangement, I got an auto rickshaw. But, it's just basic things like this. Among yourselves, you can think about things like this. Generally, now here comes my complaint session. when I come to Baroda, there's never any line for hanging across, and usually there's no water ready in the room to drink, and things like that. So maybe you should discuss among yourselves how to improve all these things. It may be just my bad luck, but definitely whenever I come to Baroda, the sound system is always out of order. And I don't think there's even any exception to this. So someone, and of course the place is always dirty, but I almost gave up on that. Would be nice to clean the place up, at least before I come. At least the temple could get better cleaned before I come. You'll see the fans in the temple room, things like that. I mean, it is better than it used to be, but there's definitely room for improvement also. So maybe you could just find some time and discuss among yourselves how to improve all these things. Whoops, we said 7:20 now. So we'll do 7:10. You told him to stop the kirtan? Sorry? Okay, well if you're having a class here, it doesn't matter. They can go on as long as they like with whatever they want to sing. No, they were singing that Radharani Ki Jai, but they don't sing anything for more than 1 minute at a time, so by the time you got up there, it already changed. They have a large repertoire of songs, so it takes some time to go through it all. I didn't learn so many songs, I only learned one. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna. I don't hardly